In Yakutia, from October the 21st, some bus routes between settlements of the Republic will stop working. According to the head of the Ministry of Transport of the region, Vladimir Sivtsev, this will affect the lines Yakutsk, Pokrovsk, Moksogolok, Yakutsk, Berdizhestyak, Yakutsk, Namtsi, Katrik, and Nizhny Bestyak, Kurapcha, reports the Telegram channel Honest Yakutia. The buses are scheduled to resume operation only in January 2026. The reason for the restrictions is the lack of funds in the budget to finance public transportation. Now there are no figures for a number of programs, at zeros, but the second reading, funding will be available. Let's not ask such questions yet. Yuri Nikolaev, head of the relevant committee, said during a budget hearing in the Republic's parliament, writes the Moscow Times. There are also problems with providing people with food in Yakutia's northern regions. Products on the socially important list, like flour, bread, sugar, due to difficult conditions this year, have been delivered very little. Entrepreneurs do not carry such products. We will still be able to reach the new year. But how will we get there? Asked a representative of the Bulun Ulus at a meeting in the parliament. In response, he was told that they would return to this topic during the second reading of the budget. The channel LB Potok writes that the food imported by the authorities to the Arctic regions, including fresh eggs and vegetables, is primarily distributed to military families and educational institutions, while the rest of the local residents are sold what is left in the stores. We are talking in particular about the village of Saskylakh, the route to which from Yakutsk is 2,500 to 2,900 kilometers. Moskva reported earlier that the Yakutian JSC Arctic Trade and Logistics Company, engaged in the northern importation of socially important products, lost its funding due to the lack of money in the budget. In 2025 to 2026, there will be no deliveries along the winter road, the company said. By the lack of money, the Yakutian authorities are preparing to carry out mass layoffs in budgetary organizations, which have already begun in a number of districts of the Republic. The Federation of Trade Unions of Yakutia urged not to classify information about layoffs, to which the head of the regional finance ministry, Valery Alexeyev, said that no layoffs are planned, accusing the trade unions of stirring up the situation. According to the operational data of the unified portal of the budget system of the Russian Federation, at the end of September, the cumulative deficit of the regions reached 724.8 billion rubles against a surplus of 472.1 billion rubles for the same period of 2024. Interim deficit was recorded in 68 subjects. Total expenditures of the regions grew by 15% year-on-year to 16 trillion rubles. At the same time, revenue growth amounted to only 6%. Against this background, some regions, including the Yaroslavl region and Dagestan, are preparing to raise taxes and cut tax exemptions. This is causing protests in the regions. It is expected that such protests will soon expand in scale. Alarm is growing in Russia's Z community over Russian dictator Vladimir Putin's reluctance to end the war against Ukraine, which has dragged on too long and is no longer victorious. Propagandist Alexander Kramov has spoken of the high likelihood that Moscow will lose everything as a result of this conflict, including the Crimea and the Donbass it captured. The propagandist drew a historical parallel with the Livonian War of the 16th century, recalling the consequences of that long and costly battle for Russia. Everything our country fought for 20 years had to be given up. The protracted Livonian War brought Russia only economic problems and ruin, which ended with the time of troubles. Kramov wrote, according to the blogger, the protracted war not only exhausted resources but also led to the unification of Moscow's enemies. He recalled that it was precisely because of Ivan the Terrible's aggression that Lithuania formed an alliance with Poland, forming the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, one of Russia's main adversaries for the next 2 centuries. Kramov emphasized that Russian propagandists who compare the current SVO to the Northern War are doing so in vain. For some reason, no one mentions the Livonian War in this context. But it teaches us a completely different lesson, that years of resource-intensive clashes with the enemy can end with 0, or more accurately, negative results, wrote the alarmed propagandist. He didn't rule out the possibility that as a result of this war, Russia would lose all its conquests, including Crimea and the eastern territories. He recalled that Moscow had already lost Kherson in the fighting. The Z blogger didn't rule out the possibility that in the event of a crisis, Russia's so-called new territories would exist only on paper, with their administrations evacuated to Belgorod or Rostov-on-Don. It's time to take stock before it's too late so that we don't end up like the Livonian War, Kramov concluded. Increasingly, it's Z bloggers and pro-Kremlin commentators who are saying that prolonging the war threatens Russia with internal collapse. Their words betray growing desperation, even among those who recently insisted that everything is going according to plan. The propagandists are trying to reach Russian dictator Vladimir Putin, who has clearly completely lost touch with reality. Media also wrote that even Z economists were howling. Russia faces hard times in 2026. The Center for Macroeconomic Analysis and Short-Term Forecasting, which is close to the Putin regime, has concluded that the Russian economy will almost certainly face a recession in 2026. This statement from Z economists confirms that the Russian economy is indeed in dire straits. The consolidated leading indicator for the emergence of a recession in the Russian economy has exceeded its critical threshold. The system has signaled a high probability of a decline in the physical volume of GDP in 2026, the pro-Kremlin analysts stated in a report. The Center for Macroeconomic Analysis and Short-Term Forecasting, CMASF, cites rising interest rates as the main reason for the worsening forecasts. Until the end of 2025, GDP growth will be supported by buoyant domestic demand, driven by expectations of a VAT increase. However, starting in 2026, this factor will disappear, and demand will likely adjust downwards. Experts warn that the decline in GDP increases the risk of a systemic banking crisis, and Russia is already very close to one, according to the report.